An entire family went to bed that night, expecting a new year. By morning, all four were dead, and the man who killed them had slept on their sofa, eaten their food, and walked out the door without ever being identified. This is the story of the Setagaya murders, one of Japan's most disturbing unsolved cases, and the question that still haunts Tokyo: who climbed through that bathroom window, and why? If you believe families like the Miyazawas deserve more than to be remembered only for the way they died, take a second right now to tap like and hit subscribe to Famous Cold Case. It costs you nothing, but it tells every platform that their story matters. And in the comments, let us know where you are watching from, so their surviving relatives can see that people all over the world still care what happened in that little house by the park. This is Famous Cold Case, and today's case is the Setagaya murders, the brutal annihilation of the Miyazawa family in western Tokyo. The Miyazawa family lived in a residential area of Setagaya Ward, in a neighborhood called Kami-Soshigaya. Their two-story home was attached on one side to a property belonging to Yasuko's mother, Haruko, and on the other side, it backed directly onto Soshigaya Park. It was a good place for children. From the second-floor windows, you could see trees and paths. For young Nina and Rei, the park was their extended backyard. 44-year-old Mikio Miyazawa worked for a marketing or consulting firm. He was the kind of salaryman who divided his time between the office and the family computer at home, checking emails and handling work even on days off. His 41-year-old wife, Yasuko, was a teacher. She ran private lessons from home, helping neighborhood children with their studies. Their daughter, 8-year-old Nina, was clever, active, and talented. She had skipped a school grade and loved ballet. Their son, 6-year-old Rei, had a developmental disability, but his parents were deeply devoted to him, building their lives around his needs to make sure he felt secure and loved. By the end of December 2000, the family was doing what most families in Tokyo were doing, getting ready to say goodbye to the old year. On December 30th, they went shopping, returned home, made plans with relatives over the phone for the New Year period, and then settled in for a quiet evening. Mikio intermittently used his computer to check work messages while Yasuko spent time with the children. At some point, they ate dinner, watched television, and eventually went to bed. It was an ordinary winter night. They had no idea it would be their last. Sometime around 11:30 that night, as the neighborhood grew still and the park behind their house went dark, a lone figure emerged from the trees. He moved quietly through Soshigaya Park until he reached the back of the Miyazawa house. There, a tree stood close enough to the building for him to climb. He went up, reached across to the small second-floor bathroom window, and carefully removed the insect screen. Then, he pulled himself through the opening and climbed into the house. Inside, the family slept. The first person the intruder encountered was Rei, asleep in his bedroom on the second floor. Without a word, the stranger went to the boy's bed and strangled him with his bare hands. We will never know what Rei saw or felt in those final moments. We only know that a 6-year-old child died where he should have been safest. The attack in Rei's room likely caused some noise, a scuffle, a thud, a small cry. Mikio, who had been sleeping downstairs on the first floor, heard something and rushed up the stairs to see what was wrong with his son. When he reached the second floor, he came face to face with the intruder. The struggle between them was short and savage. The killer was armed with a long sashimi-style knife, a slim kitchen blade traditionally used for slicing fish. Mikio fought as best he could, and he actually managed to wound his attacker, drawing blood. But the stranger overpowered him. He stabbed Mikio repeatedly, in the torso, in the face, and finally in the head with such force that the tip of the blade snapped off and lodged in Mikio's skull. Mortally wounded, Mikio fell or was pushed down the stairs to the first floor, where his body came to rest at the bottom of the staircase. The killer followed and continued to stab and slash him with the broken knife, further mutilating a man who was already dying or dead. By now, Yasuko and Nina had awakened. Whether they heard the initial disturbance in Rei's room, the fight on the stairs, or both, they quickly realized something was terribly wrong. At some point, the intruder turned his attention to them. One version of the reconstructed events suggests that he confronted them upstairs. He struck Nina with such force that several of her teeth were knocked out. In the chaos, Yasuko tried to tend to her daughter, pressing tissues against her mouth to stop the bleeding. It appears she then attempted to lead Nina downstairs, perhaps hoping to flee through the front door or reach her mother's adjoining residence. But the attacker caught them before they could escape. With his original knife broken, the killer went into the kitchen and grabbed another weapon, a santoku knife from the Miyazawa kitchen. Armed with this second blade, he continued to attack Yasuko and Nina. He stabbed them again and again, focusing on their faces and necks. Even after their lives had been snuffed out, he continued stabbing them, inflicting wounds far beyond what was necessary to kill. The brutality inflicted on the mother and daughter exceeded even what was done to Mikio and Rei, leading some later to believe that whoever did this had a particular rage directed at women or at this family's women specifically. By the time the killer was finished, 4 people were dead: a father, a mother, and 2 small children. The entire household had been wiped out in a matter of minutes. What happened after the murders is just as disturbing, but in a different way. Rather than fleeing immediately, the killer remained in the house for hours. He unplugged the phone line, ensuring that no one inside could call out and making it harder for the outside world to reach them. But he did not hurry away. Instead, he made himself comfortable. He found the family's first aid kit and used their bandages and medication to treat the wounds he had received in his fight with Mikio. He did not attempt to clean up his blood, and he did not dispose of the used bandages. He left them on the floor for investigators to find. Then he went into the kitchen and opened their refrigerator. He made himself barley tea. He cut melon or took pre-cut melon and ate it. He opened the freezer and consumed multiple ice creams. He moved through their kitchen as if it were his own, in a house where the bodies of a family he had just killed lay nearby. At some point, he lay down on one of the living room sofas and took a nap. The idea of a killer sleeping in the same house as his victims' bodies, surrounded by their belongings and the evidence of his crime, is hard to fathom. But that is what appears to have happened. He also used the family computer, logging on and navigating to a theater website that Mikio had previously bookmarked. This detail, mundane as it sounds, confirms that he felt comfortable enough to sit and browse on their PC, leaving digital traces behind. And then there is the toilet. The killer went into the bathroom and defecated in the toilet. He did not flush. He threw some items, Mikio's wallet, house keys, and some papers, into the toilet bowl, but he left his feces there. Forensic tests later showed that his last meal included string beans and sesame seeds, a simple meal that became one of many small, strange data points in the case. At some time in the early morning hours, near dawn on the 31st of December, he finally left the house. He did not take anything of significant value. The family was not robbed. He did not set the house on fire or attempt to conceal his presence. He simply walked away, leaving behind a scene of devastation and an astonishing amount of physical evidence. The next morning, Yasuko's mother, Haruko, who lived in the attached property next door, became worried when she could not reach her daughter's family by phone. She did not know that the phone line had been unplugged. After repeated unanswered calls and rings at the intercom, she decided to check in person. Around 10 in the morning, she entered the house. The sight that greeted her is difficult to imagine. On the ground near the bottom of the staircase, she found Mikio's body, motionless and covered in blood. Shocked but desperate, she moved upstairs, where she found Yasuko and Nina, both lifeless, bearing the marks of a frenzied attack. In another bedroom, she found Rei in his bed, his small body soaked in blood. Realizing the horror of what had happened, she called the police. Tokyo Metropolitan officers responded quickly and began the painstaking work of processing the scene. The amount of forensic material left behind seemed, at first glance, almost like a gift to investigators. The killer had left his broken sashimi knife, the santoku knife, his clothes, his bag, his bandages, his blood, his feces, his fingerprints, and more. From these items, they were able to build a detailed partial profile of the unknown man. From blood and tissue, they determined he was male with blood type A. His DNA suggested a father from East Asia, likely Japanese, Korean, or Chinese, and maternal lineage consistent with Southern European or Mediterranean ancestry. Despite this mixed genetic background, it is likely he appeared fully or mostly East Asian in everyday life. Hair found in the bag and around the scene indicated very short black hair. The pattern of wounds suggested he was right-handed, from his clothing, a sweater and trousers, and from the size and style of the waistbag and shoes. Investigators estimated his height at around 170 centimeters, roughly 5 feet 7 inches, with a slim build. The physical demands of climbing the tree and overpowering the victims led them to estimate an age range of about 15 to 35 years at the time of the crime. The knives used in the murders were traced to stores in Kanagawa Prefecture, southwest of Tokyo. The sweater he left behind was part of a limited run. Only about 130 units were sold in Japan. Police managed to track down a dozen people who had purchased that model, but none turned out to be the killer. Shoe prints left inside and outside the house were tied to a type of sneaker produced in South Korea, in a specific size that was not commonly sold in Japanese stores. Soil particles found on some items pointed towards South Korea's Gyeonggi province, which includes the region around Seoul. Inside the waste bag, scientists found tiny grains of sand that, after detailed mineral analysis, match sand from the Nevada desert in California, particularly near Edwards Air Force Base. All of this told investigators that they were dealing with someone unusual, possibly a person who had lived or traveled abroad, possibly with a connection to South Korea or the United States, and with a genetic background that combined East Asian and Southern European ancestry. But there was a problem. When they ran his DNA and fingerprints through Japanese criminal databases, nothing matched. When they asked for checks beyond Japan's borders, they still did not get a hit. For all the evidence left behind, the most important piece, the killer's name, remained missing. Over the years, multiple theories have emerged about who this man was and why he chose the Miyazawa family. One theory is that he was a local youth or young adult with a grudge, possibly related to skateboarding in the park. Before the murders, Mikio had reportedly confronted noisy skateboarders near the house and filed noise complaints with the police. Some have speculated that a skater or someone associated with them may have decided to exact revenge. The clothing left behind, a casual sweater and bag, could match this image. But there has never been solid evidence linking any specific individual from the skateboarding community to the crime. Another theory focuses on money. At the time of the murders, the city was expanding the park, and families in nearby homes were receiving large compensation payments, sometimes reportedly up to tens of millions of yen, to move. One investigative writer proposed that someone learned the Miyazawas were due to receive such compensation and plotted to obtain the money through violence, possibly by hiring a hitman from overseas. In this version, the killer would be a professional assassin, confident enough to leave behind evidence because he believed he could vanish beyond Japan's reach. Authorities, however, have publicly rejected some of the more sensational versions of this theory, noting that if they accepted certain claimed matches as genuine, the case would be considered solved, which it is not. A third theory sees the killer as a drifter or migrant, perhaps a person moving between countries and living on the edge. The proximity of the house to transportation routes, combined with the foreign elements in the evidence, the shoes, the sand, the mixed DNA, have led some to imagine a man who traveled widely, maybe as a worker, maybe as a transient, who chose the Miyazawa house more or less at random. In this scenario, the family's only mistake was living next to a park that offered cover and access to interstate or rail networks. Psychological interpretations of the crime often point to the extreme violence against the female victims. The repeated stabbing of Yasuko and Nina's faces and necks, and the fact that the killer continued to attack them even after death, have been read as possible signs of deep anger toward women, or toward a mother-daughter pair. Others see the entire attack, on all 4 family members, as an explosion of rage consistent with a crime of passion, rather than a coldly calculated professional hit. Yet, investigations into the family's personal life have not revealed a clear stalker, scorned lover, or bitter enemy. There is also the uncomfortable possibility that the killer may have had some connection to military communities or long-term expatriate life, hinted at by the sand traced to the region around Edwards Air Force Base and the mixed ancestry. Some have wondered whether he could have been part of the foreign presence in Japan or someone who moved between bases and countries. But again, without a match in any known database, this remains speculative. For Tokyo Metropolitan Police, the case became one of their most resource-intensive investigations. Over the years, hundreds of thousands of officer hours have gone into following leads, re-interviewing witnesses, and reanalyzing evidence. Tens of thousands of tips have been received. At one point, more than 40 officers were assigned to the case full-time. Even 2 decades later, a dedicated team remained in place, determined to find the man who walked into that house and never looked back. One of the central figures in the investigation was Chief Inspector Takeshi Tsuchida, who led the early years of the case. The images from the scene stayed with him. The difference between the peaceful faces of those who die in bed from illness and the contorted expressions of victims whose lives are torn away in terror. Even after retirement, he continued to spread flyers, talk about the case, and visit the Miyazawa family's surviving relatives. The paternal grandmother, Setsuko, kept a shrine in her home with photos of Mikio, Yasuko, Nina, and Rei. She prayed for them and for answers. The trauma was so severe that she later said she barely remembered attending the funeral. For her, one question eclipses all others. Why? Why this family? Why such cruelty? For many years, the house itself remained standing, a grim reminder for everyone in the neighborhood. While other old homes were demolished or rebuilt, the Miyazawa house stayed, its interior largely untouched except by investigators and memorial services. Ultimately, due to age and structural concerns, authorities decided to tear it down. Before doing so, they meticulously documented the layout, photographed and measured every corner, and preserved all evidence. The building is gone, but its story exists in careful records, waiting for the day a new piece of information finally makes those records meaningful in a courtroom. Today, an official reward is still offered for information leading to an arrest. The unknown man's DNA and fingerprints remain preserved, ready to be checked against new samples and new databases. Advances in forensic science, including genetic genealogy, give some hope that one day, either a direct match or a familial link might be found. All it would take is one hit, one person arrested or tested for an unrelated matter whose DNA or prints match the traces left in that Setagaya house. If you are still here, still listening at this point, that matters. It means you chose not to look away from a difficult story. In a world where attention is the currency that drives action, your attention is a form of pressure to test evidence, to revisit old files, to keep cases like this from being quietly forgotten. Add the words, "Justice for the Miyazawas," in your comment. It is a small act, but together, those small acts can become a voice loud enough that one day, someone, somewhere, finally answers for what happened in that little house by the park. As of now, the Setagaya murders remain unsolved. The man who climbed that tree, slipped through the bathroom window, and destroyed an entire family has never stood before a judge. He left behind his blood, his waste, his clothes, his shoes, his bag, his food habits, and even traces of the places he had been. But he also left behind a grandmother who prays, detectives who cannot forget, and a community that learned how fragile safety can be. Thank you for spending your time and your empathy on this story. If you want to stand with families like the Miyazawas and help keep their cases alive, please like this video, subscribe to Famous Cold Case, and turn on notifications so you do not miss future episodes. Thank you for watching, and see you in the next video.